Anshul Pandey, co-founder and CTO of Accern. Welcome to the Data Exchange podcast.
Thanks for inviting me, Ben. It's been an honor to be here.
All right. So before we jump into the technical discussion here, just by way of introduction to the audience, I'm on the Accern website right now. So I'm seeing two phrases: uncover risk and investment insights with no-code AI, and also Accern accelerates AI workflows for financial service enterprises with a no-code AI platform. So, very briefly, what exactly is Accern?
Sure. So Accern is a no-code AI platform. We operate in the financial services domain primarily. What we really mean by those statements is any customer in the financial services domain can come onto our platform. They can, without really knowing the intricacies of machine learning and AI modeling, they can select different types of data. There are lots of pre-trained models that they can utilize. They can also personalize and customize these models, and then eventually deploy and integrate to their existing workflows. So essentially, an end-to-end, I would say, AI platform with lots of tooling on top of different types of models and lots of pre-trained models, and then additional utilities around customization, personalization, and so on. That's what we do.
So, as we were discussing before we started recording this podcast, the heart of Accern is NLP and unstructured text.
Yes.
In text itself, right? So, with that said, Anshul, so in your mind, what are the key components of a modern NLP platform or NLP stack?
Sure. So I think in the last couple of years since we started the company, we ourselves witnessed we witnessed new departments essentially arising within the overall NLP stack that we have to manage, all the way from data procurement, data labeling, as ensuring quality of the training data that we will be utilizing in the model. We have a full-fledged team that only does R&D on different types of models and model architectures. Again, there is a full-fledged team as well as an independent auditor that looks at the model benchmarks. So we have an outsourced team that also looks at different models and different ground truth data set, and then looks at, again, how different types of models are performing. And then they present their analysis saying that for this
so you have, so what you're describing here is some sort of model hub.
Mm-hmm.
And collection of models that you folks are constantly refining for the financial services domain.
Yes. So there's a model hub, there is a data procurement team and data cleaning and labeling team. Then, of course, there is a full MLOps lifecycle, which we ourselves take only after the model has been ready to go really into production. So MLOps team, where we have the whole monitoring snapshot of the model, version controls of the model, identifying degradation and decays and so on.
So you have a model hub. So there's enough models for people to get started with, mm-hmm. And then so I'm a new user of the platform. I have certain NLP applications or tasks I want to do. So there's a bunch of models. So then what? So how do I make sure these models work well for my application?
Sure, perfect. So when we define application or a use case, there is some kind of data that you will be processing. Now, so on the platform, a user would start with a use case. So they will say, okay, my job is, say, a data scientist working in the insurance or banking industry. And then we will see a lot of different types of use cases that the platform would essentially recommend that you can utilize pretty much with a single click of a button. And when I say use case, it's a combination of data, model configuration, and the delivery integration. Now, I could really go on my data store on the platform and say, okay, these are the additional data I want to process, whether it's a file system, it's connection to some APIs. Then you can pick individually from a full catalog of of models in the model hub. So say you are doing NER and entity linking, those are all, again, the models available depending on the use case. And then you can say, okay, I want all of this output to be delivered to me to that particular data.
But then I assume that, so I have my data somewhere. It could be Databricks or a file system or somewhere. I point Accern to it. So Accern has a model hub. So does Accern assume that I've already annotated the data?
Great question. So sometimes we do get annotated data, and that means we have now models that can utilize your annotation and then basically replace our recommendation based on like towards your annotations. But it does not assume that by default. So it says you can send your unstructured data completely and say, I want to do name entity recognition on public equities. And there is already a model that does it very well. So you can just pick and choose and deploy from there on.
I see. And then, so then a modern NLP platform will have some sort of model hub, some sort of tooling around validating and testing and QAing your model, and then deployment. And then before the model hub, you have some sort of data annotation tool. And then some sort of a modern NLP platform should also have connectors to the usual data sources that people might have, file systems, these modern data platforms like Databricks and Redshift and BigQuery or whatever.
And in addition, I would also say at the delivery or output layer, integration with BI tools, because like visualization dashboards, because it's very difficult for people to really make sense of NLP analytics unless they really see and like visualize some charts around it and start to dive deeper into what kind of analytics is coming out of the data.
So are there alternative visualizations for NLP? Because the standard visualizations for structured data are the bar charts, line chart, pie chart, this kind of things, right? So maybe tree map. So what kinds of visualizations do you think work particularly well for NLP and text?
Sure. So I think word cloud has been the go-to for a lot of use cases, right? People are trying to find anomalies or patterns in the data, and then you can like really power that word cloud with different algorithms in different weights, right? So sometimes it's a word cloud of what are the unknown or surprising items being discovered versus what is the most common phrase and word that is getting mentioned. I would say a lot of traditional visualization techniques can be adopted once you have some structure out of this unstructured data. So for example, if you're able to already identify what are the named entities in this corpus of data, you can very well do a bar chart and say, oh, that's the volume and frequency and the trend around the number of times this particular company is being mentioned. So I think there are some tools that we loved. When I did my PhD, I did lots of visualization on text. I mean, we loved Kibana, Elasticsearch originally. And I think these days with there are good support for like even Power BI and so on, once you have some structure identified on the data. So I would say like right now you can pretty much use all BI tools with regards to the specific techniques for text. Word cloud has been one, highlighting specific parts of the text has been another, and which you again see in lots of annotation tools.
What about because for example, in the case of entity linking, what about a graph?
Yep. So the graphs are.
But then, Anshul, the challenge there is most people get lost in graphs, right? So graphs are not a natural visualization for people. So what are some tricks in terms of visualizing graphs?
So we used to call that like the hairball visualization. Lots of times you just get like a full mission mash. I think there are some visual techniques that you can adopt pretty much on the get-go. So for example, there is discussions around opacity, right? You can change how thick or how strong the color of the link between two items are based on how many times it is occurring, right? Again, how interesting is the link between two items? You can really encode that with the colors with which those links are being made. There are also
but then it's not techniques. So the thing about graphs is so you can explore. So if you create provide someone with a tool where they can explore, zoom in, zoom out, pan and navigate the graph. They learn something. So it's mostly for exploration and investigation.
Yeah.
It's not like as you alluded to, the traditional visualizations. You can provide a report. Here's my report. Here's the most frequently used phrases or terms, right? So in a graph, if you present it to a decision maker, it's a bit tougher. What is this?
Yep. So I would always say that visualizing the whole corpus within using a graph technique is not very useful. However, when you are only looking at a smaller scope, right? So there's Ben Schneiderman's mantra for interface design, visual interface design, which was overview first, zoom and filter, details on demand. I would say when you utilize graph techniques, you really have to start with zoom and filter, right? So for example, am I looking at Apple as a company? So if you already zoom into Apple, yes, you can see, okay, these are the leadership, these are the products that are being mentioned. But if I say, let's look at the overview of everything that is being done in the technology sector, that's very difficult with graph to visualize and to really make a decision. So I would say for a decision maker, you already have to zoom into a much smaller or like much more fine like granular view of what you are really looking for when utilizing graph techniques. Otherwise, it's again very difficult to make sense of it.
I bet because you focus on financial services, most of the users actually prefer traditional charts and visualizations, right? We actually, Anshul, I've been wanting to ask you this question. So we just talked about the key components of a modern NLP platform, which is very general, right? So it's a general set of components. So why was it important for you as a company to focus in financial services instead of building a general purpose NLP platform?
Sure. I think this again goes back to the genesis of Accern, right? Of course, there's one practical aspect is one of the first clients that reached out to us were from financial services, so we kind of got an indicate first early user to start to evaluate a product market fit. But even today, 7 years into the history, we are still financial services focused, right? And that goes in line with the DNA and the philosophy that we have in the company. We strongly believe in the verticalization aspect of AI. I think we are still the kind of tasks that are in the financial services domain really require, there's a lot of really good R&D that needs to go into to build models that work well for those tasks. So let me take a very simple example. If you are doing, say, NER and entity linking, going from iPhone 13 as a product, linking all the way back to Apple, and then Apple security, which is actually AAPL traded ticker, and then maybe a unique identifier. You cannot really get it from existing out-of-box NLP models. So I think there was a depth of the kind of NLP problems that you're solving, as well as this strong belief that we are the future of AI adoption is going to be very task-oriented. Of course, in the very, very further into the future, we'll have general purpose AI. But
in the enterprise in particular, right? Because they want something that works and solves a natural problem as opposed to something that is more good for prototyping.
And there's enough empirical evidence why that approach works better, right? There's enough benchmark now that shows open source effort may not actually scale.
And by the way, we have a mutual friend, David Talby, who does something similar in healthcare. And there, his rationale is actually even easier to appreciate than yours because everyone is more familiar more familiar of healthcare, right? So, for example, he would say, yes, you can build an NLP model for an emergency room doctor, but they use very different vocabulary than someone who is a cancer researcher, right? So,
Mhm.
so different areas of healthcare and medicine have very different terms and entities and slang. So, is this the case in? I mean, financial services is a big thing, right? So there's the traders, there's commercial banking, there's insurance, there's.
So no, I think that's absolutely correct. I think let me just take just a very simple example. Let's say an article comes out that says JP Morgan analysts downgraded this particular company's rating from upgrade, like buy to hold, right? Something like that, like very generic. That particular single article or like one title has very different interpretation if you go and talk to a credit risk analyst versus a trader versus someone who's in another domain within financial services. So I think there is lots of context that goes in with regards to interpretation, and then beyond the context, and then you also have these specific vocabularies that are very relevant for certain departments and not so relevant for another. So I think that is where when I said like there's lots of depth in the amount of NLP research that we have to do supporting these different domains.
So it's actually interesting because so this one of the things I think that people aren't aware of because they hear a lot about these large language models and these transformers and embeddings, right? So is that to some extent, and I mean, I do quite a bit of NLP these days. To some extent, there's actually a preponderance of models. There's a lot of models to choose from, right? So the tools that I think people really need these days is how do I go from a model hub with a lot of models, and I can start with a few candidate models from the model hub, but how do I tune these models for my domain? That step is not quite as easy and transparent and known to non-expert NLP people. And by the way, we've been doing these NLP surveys, and when you ask people what are their pain points, that's one of them, which is basically how do I tune a model? So what is your guys' approach to tuning a model for a specific use case?
Sure. What we did, originally we started first Accern with pretty much like a platform where you could even build models if you wanted to. We saw that the adoption was not that great originally, and very soon we realized that customers wanted more than just
now there's thousands and thousands. I mean, you go to Hugging Face, it's just confusing what to use.
Exactly, right? So now I think we are at a, so what we started to do, we are like, okay, we are going to do that heavy lift. We allow us to build new models, right? So we started to explore with lots of different types of models. We have traversed the full, I would say, the whole journey from core NLP to Glove, Word to WEC, to even Odin. I think that was a framework that was published, to BERT, Digital BERT, Film BERT. Like, so we kind of took the majority of that R&D accountability on ourselves. And we said, okay, we are going to be super transparent with you. This is our quarterly report around how we have benchmarked these models. And that's the gold data set on which we benchmark these models. And Accern is going to adopt this version from second version, like next release onwards, right? Because it seems to be the most stable and cost-friendly.
By adopt, you mean adopt it to financial services?
Yes, we are going to adapt it to financial services and bring it as part of a broader model catalog that you see offered as part of the platform.
And Anshul, explain to our audience why, if I had a data science team in a bank, why don't I do this myself?
Sure. I think a couple of technical reasons, and I think there is, of course, business consideration. The very first is R&D. If you really look at some of the planning documents, the Confluence pages that we saw at some of our clients, the cost to really go from zero to really deploying a full-fledged AI use case with very clear ROI, it's a lot, right? There's of course like data science shortage of talent and so on that's already there. There's a lot of technical effort that really goes into building this full stack alongside, because you also have to think about
and this is the key, it's a stack. It's not
exactly.
it's not just one piece, right?
It's not one piece, right? You have to really rethink about, reimagine how you are going to do infrastructure procurement. You cannot have like NVIDIA Titan just lying around and a DGX 800 just lying around idle. They are going to cost lots of resources. So
and this is an ongoing thing.
And it's an ongoing thing,
right? So text gets introduced, terms get introduced. So
right. So I think that was one, like from the ROI and the cost point of view, definitely there was a lot of questions and considerations. At the same time, when you really go through this whole life cycle, even then, I think there were recent reports why the success rate of some of these AI projects to really add value to the business was not that great, because end of the day, there was not clear consensus around what is the eventual use case for which I'm deploying. So I think for internal data science teams, thinking about de-risking yourself from the talent pool point of view, the amount of the cost that it is going to incur, as well as you spend 3 years. By that time, maybe there's a new model that's out there, and suddenly your business owner is saying, no, I don't want to use GPT-3, I want to use T5 because that's the new article I read. So I think those are a lot of factors which is now in a way kind of shifting this mindset to say, okay, let's not really build everything in house. If we can find parts of this stack or big portions of this stack off the shelf, we'll probably just buy it and then build everything around it.
Here's my counter, and I have two counters to my counter, and I want to see if you agree, right? So someone will say, well, what about if I just use one of these managed services from the public cloud providers, right? So they all have managed NLP services. So according to our surveys, there's two reasons why people don't do that. The first one is one we talked about, which is the whole tuning thing, right? So the services on the public clouds, Google, Amazon, and Azure, they may not be tuned for your very, very specific area in financial services, number one. Number two, if you actually read the fine print, they actually charge you by the amount of text you process. So if this is an ongoing thing, it actually gets expensive.
So for the first, I totally agree with you. On the fine tuning part, we ourselves did lots of benchmark that our clients also have, right?
So how they're general purpose things.
General purpose versus verticalized domain specific models. On the consumption-based pricing, we are also consumption-based pricing. However, when our latest infrastructure that we deployed, like I think a year and a half ago, the actual cost to process is much lower than what a lot of you see like on a lot of these managed services platforms. So our cost is like fairly low. Like if you really deploy it in-house, it would scale with consumption for sure. But even then, you'll be processing millions of documents for a couple of $100 maybe, instead of like tens of thousands. So I think maybe the adoption, it is going to be a key for adoption, where the cost to process each document is going to be lower. And I think that is where lots of clever engineering would be required. But I totally agree with you. Cost is a big factor, and fine-tuning, inability to fine-tune is also a big factor why these managed services platforms may not really be the go-to in the longer run.
So in terms of data annotation, fine-tuning, transfer learning, these kinds of things. So what are you folks doing to make, so who in the Accern platform, if I'm a domain expert, because it's a no-code platform, right? Presumably I can do the fine-tuning myself, right?
Mm-hmm.
So what's the workflow for fine-tuning a model in Accern? Do I start labeling data? So Accern has an named entity recognition model. I realize, I need to fine-tune it for our application. So what is the workflow there?
Sure. So three sub points. The first is we look at fine-tuning and customization as a good to have feature that our clients would want as in lieu if the product is not really working as per their requirement, right? In the ideal future, where I don't need to customize my MacBook here, because I think it already offers me everything that I need to have. So the way we are also approaching a product roadmap is, can we bring in as many of these features as possible so that people don't have to fine tune, even though they have the option to fine tune if they need. Second is the workflow would look
So
something
you'll
like this.
have enough. You'll have enough very domain-specific financial services models.
Yes. So
Off the
models.
shelf.
Yeah. So for example, 3 years ago, our NER model was covering around 600 companies in the US public market. Today, it covers around 80,000 companies. And it was covering around 12 financial topics. Today, we cover around 300 financial topics, right? And then we were originally selling 3 or 4 use cases. Today, we have a catalog of around 400 plus use cases that you can deploy. So that's how we are approaching this whole product roadmap. From a user point of view, let us say you want to track, Accern Corporation, which is not part of the product. Ironically, it should be.
Right. Some new startups, right? So I have a basket of new startups, right?
Right. So you come on the platform, you go towards to what we call as the taxonomy builder. So if you want to have a very, very white box taxonomy, right? Like you want to write your own queries, you want to write regular expressions and Lucene queries. That's the first step where you can interact with the models and add your own taxonomy-based models yourself, right? So you can say, I want to add Accern Corporation. As soon as I write Accern Corporation, the system will give me recommendations automatically based on what it sees co-occurring with Accern Corporation. So that it will probably say my name, a couple of other folks in the company that you can add. That's one way. It's a more of a white box approach, which works really well for financial services.
So this is someone who's not a developer is doing this.
Exactly. Now the second is where you could just go to our base NER model. You go on adaptive NLP is a feature where you can just go on that model. You click on the model and you can provide either a full file. So you have, say, text and label file, and you can just upload it. You can schedule the update, and then it will basically run the update on the base model, add this and tell you how much of a difference it is going to have on the prediction on those particular files.
And what's the rule of thumb? How much data?
Oh, I would say we want to say it should be less than a couple of 100 rows, but it does vary. So every time you have a new concept, it takes lesser data to fine tune the model, because the model can learn a new concept fairly quickly. And it has like very specific representation on the word vector. But if you have more contextual differences, right? Apple Corporation versus Apple Corporation, I don't know, like INC, and you want to like add some additional insights, it will take more data. That's what we basically recommend to our customers. If you're trying to fine tune, start with very specific type of topics that are not included currently.
Which actually, so as you were talking there, I just realized one of the most painful and parts of text that I wish I could just farm out to someone else is this whole entity resolution.
Yep.
So do you folks, you must provide that, because people are interested in tackling companies and company officials, right? So.
Yep, exactly. Right. It's difficult. We actually,
it's the kind of thing, Anshul, that you think you can build yourself, and you can build something, but why not just farm it out to someone who specializes in building that well, right?
Yep, exactly. I think if you think from a client's point of view, like, why do you like? There's lots of fogginess with regards to what is needed. There's like no Stack Overflow code base which you can copy and say it's done. It's a lot of R&D, and we spent extensively so many years so to basically build all of this out ourselves.
So what's your speculation in terms of the impact of this wave of large language models? How will they manifest themselves in industry? For example, in your case, in financial services applications. So what are you folks trying to think through what's the implications of these large language models?
Yes. So I think something that really happened is a blessing in disguise. Again, I would say 8 years ago, people all still had lots of skepticism around what is actually possible from an extraction and insights point of view. People were still pretty much in the bag of words way of thinking. And I think with advents of like GPT-3 and so on, like, which actually created a lot of publicity, like media buzz
Or
around it.
even these embeddings are incredible.
Even yes, exactly. So I think it really helped build that convincing argument that things are possible if you can really in a very crisp manner define the use case that you are trying to utilize it for. So I think that's one thing that large language models actually did for essentially the whole AI adoption movement, that it really cut down on this. It demystified this whole speculation around another AI winter, that it will not really happen. It is like lots of publicity around possibilities. Second is with regards to the actual impact on ground. I can tell you, we now have clients. We have a very large bank, for example, in South Africa. They have lended money to some of their users, right? They are actually doing credit lending, whom they would not have even qualified for any kind of loan in the past. So there's actually very real fundamental impact it is large language models are having on the business processes and the way companies were really utilizing unstructured data in their decision making. So I think there's going to be a lot of tapping into this 85-90% of unstructured data that like again majority of which is textual, that is going to happen with these large language models. And more specifically, if I can talk about use cases, I think chatbots or conversational AI are going to have their way. I think even today, people are actually expecting more of a human-like interaction with our platform. They are even saying, okay, can I just describe my whole requirement and the system can configure itself based on my requirement? And that is like if I can say, like a meta building of for AI or meta tooling. So I think conversational AI will see a lot of such adoption. And again, those will all be driving business decisions coming from all of this unstructured data, utilizing this unstructured data insights.
So in terms of NLP in financial services. So as many of our listeners know, my first job after I left academia was as a quant in a hedge fund. But that was back in the day that actually we were mostly doing trading models for derivatives. So we hardly any unstructured text. It was all signal from market data. So are there so your platform being used to generate signal for trading? You don't have to name names, obviously.
Sure. It is that's where Accern started. We have some of our largest clients are still hedge funds.
I see.
So buy-side hedge funds use us very extensively.
So that's why you take unstructured data and turn it to structured information.
Yep, exactly. Right, with like some categorical insights, some quantitative insights on top of it. If you look at our marketing materials, we even used to do back testing a while ago, and we used to say, hey, that's the Sharpe ratio you would have generated if you had traded using this insight. But I think today the platform has already outgrown those, like the kind of use cases that can be deployed on it. So yeah.
And so what are the specific challenges in terms of just kind of building out the platform and covering more use cases? So what are some technical challenges that you folks are working on?
Sure. I think one is definitely because we also provide pre-trained models. We are actually one of the few companies that is actually taking accountability on the accuracy of the models, right? We're not just letting you build whatever you want to build, configure yourself. And that basically means we have additional responsibility of ensuring the quality, ensuring responsibility, ensuring what exactly is going in the model, as well as performance decays, and if so, those happen, right? So one area
So
where
these
we
are
are
pre-trained models for financial services.
for financial services. So for example, if I'm doing document classification model or topic classification model, and my model has never seen COVID-19 kind of events, and now it has to now tag news on COVID-19. That's our responsibility. That's part of our SLA, that the model is going to be tracking newer topics, right? So we have to keep updating the models. And if we just give them such models to a client and it doesn't cover these recent topics, now that's a new discussion loop starts from there on. So I think the key areas where we are investing heavily, one is what we call as the adaptive learning for the models over time, right? So readjusting or continuous AI, that's like a newer term. I know MIT uses liquid machine learning. So again, how can you keep track of the performance of the model, ensuring that it is already fairly representative of the kind of data that it is processing? So that's one area of research. The second, on the technical side, is explainability, especially on NLP. Right? It's like lime, key lime, shop liquors. They don't really work well. So for especially if you're working on NLP data. So that's another key area of research where we are doing like some work currently.
I see. And just what languages do you folks support?
Languages with regards to
English.
we actually support 110 languages or 108 plus languages right now. So what we did is we also now have integration to some managed services translation engines as well. So let us say you wanted to deploy Accern on your GCP, you already have options to connect to Google Cloud foreign language translation engine. So currently we support around 108 languages.
So financial services, I would characterize as heavily regulated, but also technically sophisticated and early adopters.
Mhm.
In which case, as financial services always seems to be the first place many enterprise software startups sell to and gain initial traction. Which means also because they're heavily regulated, they have a lot of risks. So the term responsible AI seems to be the umbrella term to collect a lot of these risks, from fairness, transparency, as you said, safety and reliability, privacy and security. So you talked about transparency. So what are some of the general things you folks are doing to manage some of these risks around responsible AI?
Sure. So one is, as I said, like we have a fairly strong team now that is only focusing on the data that the models are going to be ingesting, the quality of the data, the lineage of the data, where it is
That's
coming
awesome.
from.
That's awesome. This is, again, this is one of these first principles, right? So data work is more impactful than model work in some ways.
Exactly, absolutely. So we are doing that's why I said, like, we even have an independent auditor that actually looks into it and says, okay, like this is where the data seems to be shaky, and that's where the gaps are. So we are doing a lot of work there on the model, early warnings to model degradation and performance decays. We have a system that actually issues alerts that says, okay, model is now based on like what the test data set has been, the model is now basically this has drifted this much, right? And or like some similar data in the past was correctly predicted and recent models are not doing it. So we have now early warning, which then tells our R&D teams to start looking into it. And then at the communication side of things, we are very transparent with regards to the benchmarking that we conduct, right? And that is something that is not currently part of the SLA. We are doing it as an active initiative that we even send to our clients. Hey, this is the white paper. That's the benchmark data. These, like, you can pretty much use it to benchmark your own internal models as well and compare with ours. So we are trying to like bring everyone to the common page and like have everyone like shared interest for the success of each one of these use cases.
So I'm actually an advisor to a law firm, the first law firm that specializes in AI. So they are the law firm that chief legal counsels will turn to, for advice about this sort of issues. So they've been working. So they're about 2 years old. They've been working with a bunch of chief legal counsels and data teams, and so I actually asked Andrew Burt, the managing partner. So what single piece of advice would you give data teams? He said, actually, in our work, what we found the most impactful first step people can do is just documentation. Document your models, your data. Is this something that you guys are also conscious about in terms of documenting as much as possible? You have kind of a workflow around documentation for data and models.
Yes, absolutely. Right. So that's where I would say it has been more on the data side of things, because in our case, because the models, we already have like logging for the model. So we know when the models got updated, what kind of weights got recalibrated. So it's all part in some logs, and you can like pull it up and like do analysis. But for data, because it requires a lot more manual human intervention, that's where possibilities of human errors are also higher. And that's where you would want to be able to go back and say, that's something we have to change as a process. So very heavy documentation, lots of Confluence pages, I would say, currently built around each step of the data pipeline.
So what specific trends in NLP are you most excited about?
I think
so there's that large language models we talked about. So what else?
I would say like the generic mindset shift that is happening around looking at NLP or general purpose, like general AI projects from a use case point of view, not from an algorithms point of view, right? We can always keep talking about GPT-3, 4, maybe a millionth. That is not what is really adding value to the business. So I think even in the last couple of years, we see fewer clients really asking us, hey, do you use glove or what to wear? More or like Distilbird versus Finbird, right? For example, we are seeing more clients asking, okay, where can it actually add value to my business, and what are the use cases that this model can actually help us solve? I think that is going to be the key to AI adoption. This mindset shift where just head of AI and a couple of us PhDs are not really driving AI adoption, but people on the business side who are now better educated about the possibilities of AI, actually saying, okay, this is the use case that we have to solve. Let's go and find the models. So I think that is going to be, I'm super excited about that trend. We are doing some work around as people can describe their use case, how can we better recommend or describe the requirement, how can we start to recommend use cases? So you will see a lot more commoditization of AI in the background, and the front end is going to be more of, this is your profile, that's the kind of work you do, these are the use cases that you should be utilizing, which are powered by AI. And you will be able to deploy them pretty much day one and start evaluating whether it adds value to your business or not. I think that's what future.
Actually, shifting away from just NLP in general, but since you are in a highly regulated industry, there's a whole new area around confidential computing, right? So these are the tools that use any sort of combination of differential privacy, homomorphic encryption, federated learning, trusted execution environments, secure multi-party computation, synthetic data. So basically the idea there is, you have to protect the security and integrity of data, whether it's in motion, at rest, or when you are actually computing. And so is this something that you folks are thinking about? Is this something, so it makes sense in a world where maybe multiple financial institutions may want to work together to build a better fraud model and things like that. So is this something you folks are actively thinking about?
So the conversation did arise, I would say, about a year and a half ago, around this. What we
So
ventured.
what are some of the use cases that brought it about?
Sure. So we have like insurance companies that are processing people's life insurance documents, right? It has lots of PII data, which we do not want, like they do not want it to be sent out of their
Yeah.
network, and we also don't want to deal
Yeah.
with it ourselves. There's lots of conflict when it goes to AML, anti-money laundering, and KYC. We have internal
So
discussions.
it makes sense to have a collaborative effort across institutions.
So yes, like I think there are, yeah, for example, like AML KYC definitely requires cross-institution discussions, because one bank wants to know from another, okay, is for this particular ID, is this user really someone that has been flagged for some reason, right? I would say, yeah. So what we ended up doing was we also started to create our on-prem pods for on-prem deployments, which we believe is going to be a good intermediate step before companies would become more comfortable with federated learning and like literally letting their data to be coming out. But I totally agree, in the next couple of years we really are going to be seeing SaaS products running on clouds, companies really opening up their warehouses, and then homomorphic encryptions and federated machine learning really making sure that everything is done in a very trusted manner.
Yeah. Usually, all these technologies are used in combination with each other. So one last thing. So another thing that I think might make sense for you, as you specialize in AI for finance, is this notion of multimodality. Because in our space, we tend to think of data types as kind of orthogonal to each other, right? So I'm specialized in text. I only do text, and then structured data, and then computer vision, and then speech. But in general, you might see value if you start combining data inputs from users who are interacting with a financial service institution through different ways, right? So what's your take on multimodal models? They're a bit early, but it seems like it makes sense to invest in that area, right?
Yeah, I totally agree. I think it is. We are really seeing. We are seeing some early adoption, at least from a discussion point of view. I think it's still a little early, where we don't see too many clients really requiring it as like a production AI strategy. But yeah, I think it's a trend that is getting picked. At least the discussions have started happening. How can you really go about making your platform that already supports all, like, again, like supports all these additional user interactions, right? That would become generating different types of data, different types of tasks that will be done on top of that data, and different types of models that will be built on top of those types, like, to basically support those kind of tasks. So I think there's interaction happening, but I would say maybe the adoption is still like maybe a year away or something.
So to an aspiring entrepreneur who's listening out there, so you talked about verticalization. So in your case, was verticalization a conscious choice, an accident, or what? And also, is that something you recommend to an aspiring entrepreneur, is to go vertical rather than horizontal?
I would say definitely go vertical. If you are going to be building AI applications for industries and specific use cases, that is where you will be able to at least get quicker iteration or like feedback loop of whether or not it is working for the use case, without really investing too much money to build a very holistic model that is more general purpose, trains on multi-million dollars worth of infrastructure. So I think it really goes in the startup ethos, in line with the startup ethos, that you really want to iterate fast, fail fast, learn fast, and improve fast. So that's where verticalization, I would say, is going to be the key for newest aspiring entrepreneurs. I see areas like data quality. There's very less done around how to better manage data quality, how to really go about building a data strategy for my AI project. People who can do that well, that would be very clever. Building verticalized pre-trained models. I envision a world where I can find pre-trained models for specific tasks, or like models for very specific tasks for very specific domain. I think that will be pretty cool. And then finally, the broader discussion around trustworthy AI and responsible AI. It's going to have massive impact on society. I think we will soon converge to a decision where policymakers will say, oh, we don't really care so much about understanding which parameter exactly the model used, because it's 5 billion parameters. You can't even make sense of it. But how can you really build systems that are still trustworthy without really telling you? That's the feature of the billionth parameter.
And with that, thank you, Anshul. And you can learn more about Accern by going to accern.com. Thank you.
Thank you, Ben.